I am Amanda, 31 years old and a registered nurse who finally bought my first home after a decade of saving every penny. My relationship with my family has always been close but complicated, especially with my brother Jason, who never quite figured out responsibility. When my parents suddenly sold our childhood home, I was shocked, but nothing prepared me for the betrayal that followed when they showed up at my doorstep, with suitcases acting like they owned the place. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had family members who crossed boundaries. Growing up in our modest suburban home, our family of four seemed typical from the outside. My parents, Martha and Frank, worked steady jobs that kept us firmly in the middle class. Dad was an accountant at a local firm, and Mom taught third grade at the elementary school 2 miles from our house. We never had extravagant vacations or luxury cars, but we never went without necessities either. From my earliest memories, the dynamic between my brother Jason and me was crystal clear. Though only 3 years older, Jason received an entirely different set of rules and expectations. When he forgot homework, Mom would rush to school with it. When he quit the baseball team mid-season because practices were too early, Dad just nodded and said, maybe next year's sport. But when I requested to drop piano lessons that conflicted with science club, I'd dot a 30-minute lecture about commitment and following through. This pattern continued through high school. Jason barely graduated, while I maintained a 4.0 GPA despite working weekends at the local pharmacy. When college applications came around, my parents seemed surprised by my ambition to become a nurse. Why not something easier? Sweetheart Mom suggested. Nursing is so demanding. Meanwhile, they paid for Jason's semester at community college, which he dropped out of after 8 weeks, and then his attempt at trade school, which lasted slightly longer at 3 months. Each time they welcomed him back home with understanding smiles and home-cooked meals. I put myself through nursing school with a combination of scholarships, student loans, and working 30-hour weeks at a 24-hour diner. The night shifts were brutal, especially while maintaining clinical rotations and classes. But I was determined. My parents attended my graduation, of course, but their congratulations felt perfunctory compared to their excitement when Jason landed his first steady job at a car dealership at 26, after years of hopping between minimum wage positions. After graduation, I moved into a tiny studio apartment and started my career at Memorial Hospital. I worked in the intensive care unit, often picking up extra shifts to start, paying down my student loans while simultaneously saving for a house. Each month I put away what I could, sometimes as little as $100, other times as much as $500 when I worked holidays or picked up overtime. Meanwhile, Jason moved back home for the 4th time after being let go from the dealership. He had a nice car, though, something my parents pointed out whenever I expressed concern about his employment situation. At least he's got reliable transportation for interviews, Mom would say. Conveniently forgetting they had co-signed for that car. It took me 7 years of disciplined saving and frugal living to accumulate, enough for a down payment. By then, I had moved to a slightly larger 1-bedroom apartment, but still lived with secondhand furniture and cooked most meals at home. Every extra dollar went toward my house fund. When I finally started looking at properties, I focused on modest homes in decent neighborhoods within commuting distance to the hospital. The housing market was competitive, and I lost out on 3 different properties before finding my home. It wasn't the biggest or the newest house, but it had character, a small yard, and 3 bedrooms. What made it special was the seller, Eleanor, an 84-year-old retired nurse who had lived there for 40 years. When her arthritis made the stairs too difficult, she reluctantly decided to sell and move to a single-level condo. When her realtor told her a young nurse was interested in the house, she immediately invited me over for tea. Eleanor and I connected instantly. She showed me photos of her nursing career from her days in a crisp white uniform and cap to more recent pictures before her retirement. She told me she felt better knowing her home would go to someone who understood the value of care. When another buyer offered $5,000 more, she still chose my offer. The day I got the keys was the proudest moment of my life. I remember standing in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, overwhelmed with emotion. This was mine. Every double shift, every meal of ramen noodles, every birthday where I asked Physic Man for Home Depot gift cards instead of clothes or jewelry had led to this moment. I spent the first month painting and fixing up small things, making the space truly mine. The first furniture I bought was a dining table that could seat 6 because, despite everything, family remained important to me. I invited my parents and Jason for the first official dinner in my new home. Cooking my mother's famous lasagna recipe as a gesture of gratitude for their support, however uneven it had been. During those first few months as a homeowner, I established a tradition of Sunday family dinners. Jason would occasionally cancel last minute or show up late, but my parents rarely missed a week. It was during these dinners that I began noticing changes in their behavior. Dad seemed more stressed than usual, checking his phone frequently and stepping outside for calls. Mom would make odd comments about retirement and how expensive everything was getting. When I asked directly if everything was okay with their finances, they brushed off my concerns. They're just getting older, I told myself. Everyone worries about retirement. Little did I know that these subtle shifts in behavior were the first warning signs of what was coming. Had I paid closer attention, perhaps I could have prepared myself for the betrayal that would soon rock my world and test the very definition of family, loyalty. The Sunday that changed everything started normally enough. I had prepared pot roast with all the fixings, set the table with the nice dishes I had splurged on at a department store sale, and even bought a bottle of my father's favorite wine. When the doorbell rang, I expected the usual greetings and casual updates about their week. Instead, Mom was unusually quiet and Dad seemed jittery. Jason had texted that he would be 30 minutes late, something about traffic, though the roads had been clear on my grocery run earlier. We made small talk about the weather and my recent promotion to charge nurse. While waiting for him, when Jason finally arrived, he seemed different too, almost smug. He was wearing a new designer watch I had never seen before and mentioned he had just come from looking at apartments and lakeside towers. The luxury high-rise downtown, where one-bedroom units started at twice what I paid for my mortgage. There's some big news data now, and after we had all served ourselves, your mother and I have decided to sell the house. The fork froze halfway to my mouth. Sell the house, our family home, for over 25 years, but why? I managed to ask, setting my fork down as my appetite instantly vanished. It's just time, Mom said, not meeting my eyes. The neighborhood is changing, and that 2-story layout isn't getting any easier. On our knees. Dad nodded vigorously. And the market is hot right now. Our filter says we could get top dollar. I glanced at Jason, expecting to see the same shock I felt, but he was calmly cutting his meat, seemingly unsurprised. When are you thinking of moving? I asked. That's the other surprise, Mom said with a forced smile. We already accepted an offer. Closing is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. But where will you go? Have you found a new place? We're figuring that out, Dad said dismissively. We might rent for a while, see where we want to settle. Something didn't add up. My parents had always been planners, sometimes to a fault. Dad had spreadsheets for holiday budgets and vacation itineraries color-coded by activity. They would never sell their home without having the next step thoroughly mapped out. I can help you look for apartments, I offered. There's some nice senior living communities near me that aren't too expensive, Mom bristled. We're not that old, Amanda. We're not ready for a retirement home. I didn't say retirement home, I clarified. Just apartments that happen to cater to people over 55. They have nice amenities. Well, think about it, Dad said, in that tone that meant they definitely would not think about it. Jason finally spoke up. Mom and Dad know what they're doing. They don't need you micromanaging their decisions. The comments stung, especially since I was only trying to help. The rest of dinner passed in awkward conversation with my parents deflecting any specific questions about their plans. When they left early, claiming fatigue, the knot in my stomach had grown into a boulder of anxiety. 3 days later, I received a call from Diane, my mother's friend from her teaching days, who had retired to Florida 2 years ago. I just heard Martha and Frank sold the house, she said, after pleasantries. Martha mentioned they were downsizing, but I didn't realize it would happen so quickly. None of us did, I admitted. I'm still trying to process it. There was a pause on the line. Well, at least Jason is getting set up nicely. Martha must be relieved. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you mean? Oh, another pause. Longer this time? I assumed you knew. Martha mentioned they were helping Jason financially. Something about him finally being responsible enough to manage his own place. After hanging up, I sat motionless on my couch pieces falling into place. The new watch, the luxury apartment hunting, Jason's lack of surprise at dinner. I called my friend Tara, who worked at the bank where my parents had their accounts. I knew it was a long shot and possibly crossing an ethical line, but I had to know. Tara, I know you can't give me specifics about my parents' accounts, but hypothetically, if someone sold a house they owned free and clear in Oakwood Heights, what kind of money would they be looking at? Tara didn't hesitate. In that neighborhood with the market right now, easily $283,000, depending on condition and lot size, the number hit me like a physical blow. My parents' home wasn't extravagant, but they had paid it off years ago, and property values in their neighborhood had risen steadily. That weekend, I drove to Jason's apartment. The same one had been renting for 3 years. A basic one-bedroom in an older complex. I needed to confront him directly. When he opened the door, he was packing boxes. Moving to Lakeside, after all, I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. His smile faltered slightly. Yeah, signed the lease yesterday. 35th floor. Sweet view of the river. Must be nice, I said. That's what, $3,000 a month? He shrugged. The job's going well. Jason worked as a sales rep for a local brewery, a job he enjoyed but that I knew didn't pay nearly enough for luxury living. Cut the crap, Jason, I said. I know about the money. His face changed defiance, replacing the false casualness. So what if Mom and Dad are helping me out? They want to see me succeed. $280,000 isn't helping out, I said, taking a calculated guess at the amount. That's their entire retirement fund. Jason had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, confirming my suspicion. Look, they offered, I didn't ask for it. But you took it, I pointed out. All of it, apparently. Not all of it, he protested weakly. They kept some. Anyway, I've had a tough few years. This is my chance to get ahead. I shook my head in disbelief. You realize I have no place to live now, right? What are they planning to do? He suddenly became very interested in taping a box. They mentioned staying with you for a bit, he mumbled, just until they figure things out. The conversation with Jason left me reeling. but I still needed to hear the truth from my parents. I drove straight to their house, where the sign in the yard now sported a red "Sold" banner across the top. They admitted everything, though they tried to frame it as a positive. "Jason needs this opportunity," Mom insisted. "He's struggled so long." "And what about your retirement?" I asked. "What about having a place to live?" "Well, manage?" Dad said vaguely. "We have some savings left." When I pressed for details about their living arrangements, they became evasive again. "We're considering our options," Mom said. "Like moving in with me?" I asked pointedly. The guilty look they exchanged told me everything. "Maybe just for a little while," Dad finally admitted. "Until we find the right place." I left their house that day with a mounting sense of dread. They had given my irresponsible brother nearly $300,000, left themselves financially vulnerable, and now expected me to provide the safety net. The worst part was that they hadn't even asked me, had just assumed I would. Accommodate them indefinitely. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of their favoritism toward Jason, but because they hadn't respected me enough to have an honest conversation. Instead, they had created this crisis and expected me to solve it for them all. Now, while Jason enjoyed his windfall in a luxury high-rise, exactly 1 week after learning the truth, my doorbell rang at 7:30 on a Saturday morning. I had worked a late shift the night before and had been looking forward to sleeping in, so I stumbled to the door in my pajamas, bleary-eyed and irritated. Standing on my porch were my parents, surrounded by suitcases, with my father's pickup truck parked at the curb, its bed piled high with boxes and furniture. "Surprise," Mom said, with a brightness that seemed forced even through my sleep haze. "We closed early." I stood frozen in the doorway, my brain struggling to process what was happening. Dad stepped forward with a box in his arms. "Gonna let us in, kiddo? The moving guys will be here with the rest of our stuff in a couple hours." "The rest?" I repeated, dumbly. "What do you mean, the rest?" "Just some essentials," Mom said, already nudging past me into the foyer. "The storage unit couldn't fit everything." I stepped aside automatically as they began bringing in suitcases. My mind was racing. They hadn't asked if they could move in. They hadn't even called to warn me they were coming today. They had just shown up, assuming I would accommodate them. "I don't have anything set up," I stammered. "I thought you were still looking at apartments." "Oh, we are," Mom assured me, though her tone lacked conviction. "This is just temporary." But there was nothing temporary about the volume of possessions they were unloading. As the morning progressed, I watched in mounting horror as my carefully decorated home was invaded. The guest room was quickly filled with their belongings. My office space was rearranged to accommodate my mother's sewing table, and my father's recliner took up residence in the living room directly across from the television. In the kitchen, Mom began unloading boxes of spices and specialized cooking tools, rearranging my cabinets without asking. "Your organization makes no sense, Amanda," she commented. "Why would you keep baking supplies so far from the oven?" I bit my tongue. "It's just what worked for me." By evening, I was overwhelmed. My peaceful sanctuary had been transformed in a single day. Family photos I had never agreed to display now adorned my walls, throw pillows in colors that clashed with my decor, covered my couch, and the subtle lavender scent of my preferred candles had been replaced by my mother's stronger but puri. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my parents moving around my house, I told myself it would be okay. This was just for a weekend, maybe a week at most. They would find their own place soon. But days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, my parents entrenched themselves further. Dad established a morning routine that involved watching news at full volume, beginning at 5:30. Despite knowing I often worked late shifts, Mom took over the kitchen entirely, dismissing my meal prep system and healthy eating habits. "You worked too hard to eat like a rabbit," she would say, replacing my prepared salads with heavy casseroles and desserts. Attempts to discuss their apartment search were met with vague responses. "The market is tight right now," Dad would say, or "We're waiting for something in the right neighborhood." Meanwhile, they began treating my home as if it were theirs. Mom rearranged furniture while I was at work, claiming the new layout made more sense. Dad invited his friends over to watch sports without asking, leaving beer bottles and snack residue throughout my living room. When I tried to establish some basic ground rules, their response was dismissive at best. "It's not like you're here most of the time anyway," Mom pointed out. "You're always working. We raised you in our house for 18 years, Dad added. "You can't spare a few rooms for a couple months." The strain began affecting my work. After a 12-hour shift dealing with critically ill patients, I would come home, not to the peaceful retreat I had created for myself, but to more stress and tension. My concentration suffered, and I made a medication error that, thankfully, was caught by a colleague before reaching a patient. My supervisor noticed the change. "Everything okay at home, Amanda?" she asked during a break. "You seemed distracted lately." I couldn't bring myself to explain the full situation, so I just blamed it on some family stuff. "Take care of yourself," she advised. "We need you at your best." But how could I be at my best when my personal space had been invaded, my routines disrupted, and my very sense of ownership in my own home undermined? The breaking point of this phase came when I returned from an overnight shift to find my parents hosting a family brunch, and uncles and cousins I hadn't seen in months were scattered throughout my home, using my dishes, sitting on my furniture, leaving water rings on my coffee table. Worse, I overheard my mother telling my aunt, "We're so happy Amanda has this lovely home. It's perfect for all of us." I slipped upstairs, shut my bedroom door, and for the first time since the invasion began, I cried. Not just from exhaustion or frustration, but from the deep sense of betrayal that my parents had used me as a solution to a problem they had created themselves, all while Jason enjoyed the fruits of their generosity in his river view luxury apartment. The family brunch incident was just the beginning of increasingly brazen boundary violations. A week later, I returned home from a particularly grueling shift where I had lost a patient, a rarity in my career that always hit me hard. All I wanted was to soak in a hot bath with a glass of wine and process my emotions in peace. Instead, I walked into a house full of strangers. My parents had invited their church group over for a potluck dinner. 16 people I barely knew were scattered throughout my living room and kitchen, using my space as if it were a community center. Amanda Mom called when she spotted me. "Come meet Pastor Williams and his wife." I stood in my own entryway, still in scrubs, emotionally drained as strangers, smiled expectantly at me. I murmured a quick greeting before escaping upstairs, only to discover someone had been in my bedroom, the one space I had explicitly declared off limits. My dresser items were rearranged, and the bedspread was different, replaced with an old quilt from my childhood? When I confronted Mom later, her response was infuriating. "That old comforter was so plain," she said. "I thought you'd appreciate having something with more character." "What I would appreciate," I replied with forced calm, "is if you would respect my private space." She looked wounded. "I was just trying to help. And anyway, I don't see why you're so upset about having your family quilt on your bed. I kept it all these years for you." The conversation devolved from there, with Mom turning the situation around to make it seem like I was being unreasonable for wanting basic privacy in my own home. A few days later, I discovered that my home office, which I used for paying bills, continuing education, and occasional telehealth consults, had been completely transformed. The small daybed I kept for overnight guests was now made up as a permanent bed. My desk pushed into a corner, and my reference books packed away in boxes. "What happened in here?" I asked Ed, who was watching television downstairs. "Your mother thought Jason might want to stay over sometimes," he explained casually. "Since has been so busy with the new place, we hardly see him." I stood, speechless. They had given Jason nearly $300,000, which had funded his move to a luxury apartment, and now they were rearranging my home to accommodate his occasional visits. "That was my office," I finally managed to say. "I need that space for work." "You can work at the kitchen table," Dad replied. "It's not like you use the office every day." That night, Jason called a rare occurrence. "Hey sis," he said, sounding unusually cheerful. "Thought it'd come by this weekend, check out the family setup." The family setup. As if my home had become a new family compound rather than my personal residence that had been invaded. "It's not a good time," I said shortly, in working doubles. "Mom said you'd made up a room for me," he pressed. "Mom made up a room," I corrected, without asking me. There was an awkward pause. "Look, I know things are weird right now, but can't you just roll with it for a while? They're getting older. They need someone to take care of them." The hypocrisy was stunning. They need someone to take care of them. Then why did they give you all their money? "Not all of it," he said defensively, "and they wanted me to have it. It's not my fault they decided to stay with you instead of getting their own place." "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked incredulously. "They gave you enough money to buy your own house outright, and instead, you're living in a luxury apartment while they invade my space and somehow in the bad guy for being upset about it." Jason became defensive. "I didn't ask them to move in with you. That's between you and them." After hanging up, I realized my brothers still didn't get it, or chose not to. In his mind, he deserved the money, and my parents deserved my space, and I was being difficult for questioning any of it. The final straw came 3 days later when I arrived home to find a locksmith changing my front door lock. "What is happening?" I demanded. The older man looked up from his work, just installing the new locksman. Almost done. "I didn't order new locks." He checked his work order. "Order placed by Frank Miller, that your husband." "That's my father," I said, my voice tight with anger. "He doesn't own this house. I do." The locksmith looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I just do what the work order says." I called my father immediately. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. "Dad, why is there a locksmith changing my locks?" "Oh, your mother kept misplacing her key," he explained. "Thought it would be easier just to get new ones. Don't worry. Hell, give you copies." The casual way he said it, as if it was the most normal thing in the world to change the locks on someone else's home without permission, made something snap inside me. "Tell him to stop right now," I said, my voice shaking. "Those are my locks. This is my house. You had no right." "Don't be dramatic, Amanda," he replied. "It's just locks." I hung up and went directly to the locksmith. "In the homeowner," I said firmly, "I need to see identification proving who ordered this work." After verifying my driver's license against the property address, the locksmith apologized and left, leaving the original locks intact. When my parents returned from grocery shopping an hour later, I was waiting in the living room, hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. "We need to talk," I said, "now." Mom glanced at Dad, concern crossing her face. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said. "Everything is very much not okay." I explained about the locksmith, my voice remaining steady despite my internal turmoil. "We thought it would be helpful," Dad said dismissively. "The old locks were sticking anyway. That's not the point," I insisted. "You can't make changes to my home without asking me. This isn't your house. Well, Mom said with a little laugh, it kind of is now, isn't it? We're family. And that's when I saw it clearly. The fundamental misunderstanding that had been at the heart of this entire situation. My parents genuinely believed they were entitled to my home simply because we were related. They had given Jason money and expected me to give them shelter and return, without ever actually having a conversation about it. Worst, they seemed to think that their presence was a gift to me that I should be grateful for their company, their rearrangement of my space, their transformation of my peaceful home into a busy family hub. In that moment, I realized that polite requests and gentle boundaries would never work. I needed to take decisive action before I lost not just my home, but my sanity. That evening, after their grocery shopping was put away, I asked my parents to sit down for a serious conversation. I had prepared notes, practiced what I would say, and was determined to remain calm and rational. I want to talk about living arrangements. I began carefully. It's been 6 weeks since you moved in, and we haven't really discussed expectations or timelines. Mom immediately looked uncomfortable. I thought things were going well. They aren't, I said bluntly. There have been serious boundary issues that we need to address. What boundaries Dad asked, sounding genuinely confused, were family? I took a deep breath. Yes, we're family, but this is still my home. I've worked hard for it, and I need to have some control over my own space. I outlined specific issues: the rearrangement of my office, the invasion of my bedroom, the constant guests, without permission, the attempt to change the locks, and asked for basic respect of my property and privacy. Their reaction was worse than I had anticipated. After all we've done for you, Dad, said his face flushing. We raised you, put food on the table, clothes on your back, and I appreciate that, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. But that doesn't mean you own me or my home. Mom started to cry, quiet tears tracking down her cheeks. I just wanted us to be together, she said, like a family should be. But you've always been so independent, so difficult. The word hit like a slap. Difficult. Because I wanted basic respect in my own home. We thought you'd be happy to help us out, Dad continued. Jason got the financial help, and you're getting the joy of taking care of your parents. I stared at him, truly speechless for a moment. Is that really how you see this? As an even exchange? Well, it's not like we can afford our own place now, Mom said, dabbing at her eyes. Most of our money went to helping your brother, which was your choice, I pointed out. You never consulted me about any of this. You just showed up and expected me to accommodate you indefinitely. So what are you saying? Dad demanded. You want your elderly parents out on the street? You're both in your early 60s and in good health, I countered. And according to the equity from the house sale, you should still have enough. Their mom went to half sale for a decent apartment. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. The money situation is complicated, Dad finally said. How complicated can it be? I pressed. Even after giving Jason $280,000, you should have some left for yourselves. Another uncomfortable exchange of glances. We gave Jason a bit more than that, Mom admitted. He needed money for furniture, and the security deposit was 6 months' rent up front for that fancy building. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. How much do you have left? They wouldn't give me an exact figure, but from their evasive answers I gathered it was far less than I had assumed. Probably not enough for first and last month's rent plus security deposit on even a modest apartment. The conversation continued to deteriorate from there. Every attempt I made to establish boundaries or propose solutions was met with emotional manipulation. Mom cried harder. Dad brought up childhood sacrifices they had made. Both implied I was being selfish and ungrateful. When I suggested they ask Jason to contribute some of the money back to help them get established in their own place, they reacted as if it suggested something scandalous. "We can't take back a gift," Mom gasped. "Had be devastated." "More devastated than I am, having my home taken over?" I asked. "That's different," Dad insisted. "You're more capable." Translation: I was more responsible, so I was expected to bear the greater burden. Jason's irresponsibility had once again been rewarded, while my hard work and sacrifice had made me the family caretaker by default. The final blow came when my phone chimed with a text message from Jason. I happened to glance at during a lull in the conversation. "Mom says you're being difficult about them staying with you. Not cool, sis. They gave us everything growing up. Least you can do is help them out now, us," as if he were contributing anything at all to their well-being. When my parents finally went upstairs, nothing resolved. I sat alone in my living room that no longer felt like mine. The weight of the situation crushed down on me. I had worked so hard for this home, this sanctuary, only to have it appropriated, without my consent. I cried then silent tears of frustration and betrayal. It wasn't just about the space, though, that was significant. It was about the fundamental lack of respect, the assumption that my needs and boundaries mattered less than everyone else's in the family. As I sat there in the dim light, I realized something had to change. I could not continue living like this, walking on eggshells in my own home, watching my carefully built life crumble under the weight of obligations I had never agreed to shoulder. That night, I made a decision. If reason and emotional appeals wouldn't work, I would need to take more drastic measures to reclaim my home and my life. The morning after our failed conversation, I called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. I needed time to think, to strategize, to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined. My first call was to Sarah, a friend from nursing school who had gone on to law school and now specialized in property law. I explained the situation in detail, holding nothing back. "So legally, where do I stand?" I asked after laying out the whole mess. "As the sole owner of the property, you have every right to determine who lives there," Sarah explained. "Since your parents don't have a lease and haven't established tenancy yet, in most states that takes 30 days, you could technically ask them to leave immediately. And if they refuse, then it becomes more complicated," she admitted. "You might have to go through formal eviction proceedings, which can be lengthy and frankly devastating to family relationships." The last thing I wanted was to have my parents forcibly removed by authorities. Despite everything, I still loved them. But I also recognized that their behavior had crossed from presumptuous into manipulative and potentially financially abusive. Sarah recommended a two-pronged approach: document everything and seek mediation. Put everything in writing, she advised. Dates they moved in, conversations you've had, boundaries they've crossed. And find a neutral third party, maybe a family therapist or professional mediator, to help facilitate a conversation about expectations and timelines. My next call was to my cousin Lisa, my mother's niece, who had always been the voice of reason in family disputes. I knew she would be honest with me about how my actions would be perceived by the extended family. "Honestly, Amanda, most of the family has no idea what's really going on," Lisa told me. "At the brunch, your mom made it sound like you had invited them to live with you." "I know, what, because you were lonely in that big house by yourself?" The revision of reality took my breath away. I quickly filled Lisa in on the truth, including the money given to Jason and my parents. Subsequent financial vulnerability. "That's not what we've been told," Lisa said slowly. Your mom told Aunt Kathy that they gave Jason a small loan for his apartment deposit and were helping you with your mortgage. Another lie. I had never received a penny from my parents for my house. With Lisa's help, I began reaching out to key family members to quietly correct the narrative, not to villainize my parents, but to ensure everyone understood the reality of the situation before I took my next steps. Meanwhile, I consulted with a financial advisor, paying for an emergency session to understand what options might be available for my parents. Based on their approximate age and work history, he outlined several possibilities for them, from senior apartments with income-based rent to accelerating their Social Security benefits. All of these options would require significant downsizing from their previous lifestyle, but none would leave them homeless or destitute, as they had implied. Armed with this information, I moved to the next phase of my plan. While my parents were out visiting friends, I installed security cameras at my front and back doors, changed the Wi-Fi password, and most importantly, documented everything of value I owned, taking photos and creating a detailed inventory with photos, dates of purchase, and approximate values. If this turned truly ugly, I needed to protect myself from potential claims that I had somehow taken advantage of them rather than the reverse. The most difficult part was preparing myself emotionally. A lifetime of giving in to my parents' wishes of being the responsible one who picked up the slack when Jason dropped the ball had conditioned me to put their needs above my own. Breaking that pattern would require strength I wasn't sure I possessed. I scheduled an emergency session with my therapist, Dr. Myers, whom I had been seeing occasionally since starting my nursing career to deal with the emotional toll of the job. What you're describing is a classic case of family role entrenchment, she explained. You've been cast as the responsible caretaker, while your brother gets to be the one who needs help. But him not their caretaker, I protested. Him their daughter. Exactly, Dr. Myers agreed. And somewhere along the way, they confused your responsibility and Dot capability with an obligation to solve their problems, even ones they created themselves. With her guidance, I practiced setting and maintaining boundaries, worked on Dot managing the guilt I knew would come, and prepared myself for the confrontation that was inevitable. My final preparation was creating a formal written notice for my parents, outlining my expectations and a timeline for them to find alternative housing. Sarah helped me draft it in language that was firm but compassionate, making clear that this was not a punishment, but a necessary step for my well-being and ultimately our relationship. I set a deadline of 30 days, provided resources for senior housing options in the area, and even offered to help them with the first 3 months' rent to ease the transition. With all my preparations in place, I scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday. I invited Jason as well, since his role in this situation could not be ignored, and arranged for a professional mediator to attend to help keep the conversation productive. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I kept imagining worst-case scenarios, my parents disowning me, extended family taking their side, becoming the villain in a story where I had only tried to protect myself. But beneath the anxiety was a growing sense of resolve. This was my home. I had earned it through years of hard work and sacrifice, and while I was never willing to help my family in reasonable ways, I would no longer allow them to take advantage of my generosity or disrespect my boundaries. As the sun rose on Sunday morning, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened today, I would face it with honesty and integrity. And for the first time in weeks, I felt truly awake, truly present in my own life. My own home. It was time to reclaim what was mine. Sunday arrived with a tense stillness in the house. I had asked the mediator, a calm, authoritative woman named Diane, with 20 years of experience in family conflict resolution, to arrive 30 minutes before my parents and Jason. We used that time to set up the living room with chairs and a circle, removing the hierarchical feeling of my usual furniture arrangement. I look for power dynamics in how people position themselves, Diane explained. This setup makes it clear we're all equal participants in this conversation. My parents entered first, looking confused by the unfamiliar face and formal arrangement. Jason arrived 10 minutes late as usual, dressed casually, as if this were just another family gathering. "Who's this, Dad?" asked immediately, gesturing to Diane. "This is Diane Reynolds," I explained. "She's a professional mediator, and she's here to help us have a productive conversation about our living situation." Mom looked stricken. "You brought in an outsider to family business. I need someone neutral to help us communicate effectively." I said, sticking to the script Diane and I had prepared. "We haven't been able to do that on our own," Jason snorted. "Seems a bit dramatic." Diane smoothly took control, explaining her role and setting ground rules for our discussion. Each person would have uninterrupted time to speak. No personal attacks would be permitted. We would focus on solutions rather than blame. Amanda has asked for this meeting because she has concerns about the current living arrangements in her home, Diane began. It likely to share those concerns first. I had practiced what I wanted to say, but facing my family directly made the words catch in my throat. I took a deep breath and pushed forward. "6 weeks ago, you arrived at my doorstep with no warning and moved into my home." I began looking at my parents. "Since then, you've rearranged my furniture, converted my office to a bedroom, hosted parties without asking, invaded my private space, and even tried to change my locks. I feel disrespected and overwhelmed in my own home, which I've worked very hard to purchase and maintain." Mom started to interrupt, but Diane gently reminded her of the ground rules. I continued. "My understanding is that you sold your house and gave most of the proceeds to Jason, leaving yourselves without enough money for your own place. While I sympathize with your situation, I was never consulted about this plan, and it's unfair to expect me to house you indefinitely without any discussion or agreement." When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Diane turned to my parents. "Would one of you like to respond to what Amanda has shared?" Dad went first, his voice defensive. "We raised her for 18 years. We sacrificed everything for our children. Is it so wrong to expect some help in return? And we're not just freeloading Mom," added quickly. "I cook and clean. Frank fixed that leaky faucet in the guest bathroom." I had prepared for this response, the implication that parenting created a debt children needed to repay. Diane nodded to me when I indicated I wanted to respond. "I appreciate everything you've done for me growing up," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean I owe you my home or my autonomy as an adult. Parents choose to have children. Children don't choose to be born. Your decision to give Jason most of your money was made without consulting me, yet the consequences of that decision have fallen largely on my shoulders."
Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, I didn't ask them to give me the money they offered."
"And you accepted it," I pointed out, knowing they would need somewhere to live afterward. "They said they had it figured out," he protested. Diane directed us back to the core issue. "It sounds like there was a significant miscommunication about plans following the sale of the house. Frank, Martha, what was your understanding of the living arrangements that would follow?" What emerged over the next hour was revealing. My parents admitted they had never actually intended to find their own place. The plan, which they had never explicitly shared with either Jason or me, was to live with me permanently. "You've got all this space," Mom said, gesturing around. "And you're so busy with work, we thought you'd appreciate having us here to look after things." The 3-bedroom house I had bought specifically to have space for a home, office, and occasional guests had been in their minds excessive for a single person. They believed they were entitled to that extra space more than I was, simply because there were 2 of them and only 1 of me. As for the money, they had indeed given Jason far more than I had initially thought. Beyond the house proceeds, they had liquidated most of their retirement accounts. Had in a fall and metal house while it incurring significant penalties for early withdrawal. He's establishing himself, Dad explained, setting up a real career finally in digital life. What I asked Jason directly. What exactly are you doing with all this money that required liquidating our parents' retirement? He looked away. In investing in some business opportunities, it's complicated. Further questioning revealed that Jason had quit his brewery job shortly after receiving the money and was now pursuing various entrepreneurial schemes, none of which had any track record of success. I presented the documents ID prepared 3 copies of a statement showing my parents' options for independent living. Within their remaining budget, information about senior housing assistance and clears of risk. Finally, the formal notice, giving them 30 days to find alternative housing. What is this? Dad demanded. Scanning the papers and eviction notice. It's a timeline, I clarified, in willing to help you transition to your own place, including assisting with the first 3 months' rent, but I need my home back. The reaction was explosive. Mom began crying in earnest. Dad accused me of being heartless. Jason simply sat back watching the drama unfold as if it had nothing to do with him. Through it all, Diane maintained control, reminding everyone of the ground rules and redirecting the conversation when it veered into unproductive territory. After the initial shock wore off, we managed to have a more constructive discussion about next steps. I remained firm on the 30-day timeline, but offered several concrete ways I could help them transition from researching apartments to helping them move. To my surprise, it was Jason who finally broke the stalemate. Maybe he said slowly I could contribute something toward their housing costs, since they did help me out. It was the first acknowledgement from him that he bore any responsibility for the situation. Not a full solution, but a start. By the end of the 3-hour session, we had a tentative agreement. My parents would move out within 30 days. Jason would contribute $1,000 monthly toward their housing for the first year. I would help with moving expenses and the initial security deposit on a new place. The days that followed were tense but purposeful. True to my word, I researched appropriate housing options and scheduled viewings for my parents. Jason, perhaps feeling the weight of family scrutiny, actually followed through on his financial commitment, setting up an automatic transfer to their account. My parents, however, circled through various stages of emotional manipulation. Some days they were icy and formal, barely speaking to me. Other days Mom would cry and remind me of childhood memories and obvious attempts to make me reconsider. Dad vacillated between anger and guilt-tripping, suggesting I didn't really love them, if I could put them out this way. I held firm, reminding myself of the boundaries Dr. Myers and I had discussed. I was not responsible for housing my parents after they had given away their resources, nor was I obligated to sacrifice my well-being to make them comfortable. On moving day, exactly 29 days after our mediated conversation, the atmosphere was somber. They had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a senior living community about 20 minutes from my house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and within their means with Jason's contribution. As the last box was loaded into the moving truck, Mom hugged me stiffly. "I know you think we're being dramatic," she said, "but this feels like abandonment to us." I stepped back, meeting her eyes directly. I haven't abandoned you. I've helped you find a new home, contributed financially, and am still your daughter. What I've done is establish healthy boundaries. We barely spoke for the next 3 months. Family gatherings were awkward affairs with relatives taking sides and conversations becoming stilted when certain topics arose. Jason, to his credit, maintained his financial support, though he rarely visited our parents in their new apartment. 6 months after they moved out, I received a card in the mail from my mother. Inside was a short note. Amanda, I still don't fully understand your decision, but I've been talking with a counselor at the senior center. She suggested I might have been too quick to judge your actions. Perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime, love, Mom? It wasn't an apology, but it was an opening. We met at a neutral coffee shop the following weekend. The conversation was tentative, focused on safe topics like her new hobby of watercolor painting and my recent promotion at work. As we were preparing to leave, she said something that caught me by surprise. Your father and I were wrong to assume we'd live with you, she admitted quietly. We should have asked, not just expected. It wasn't a full acknowledgement of everything that had happened, but it was a start. Over the following months, we slowly rebuilt our relationship. This time, with clearer boundaries and expectations on both sides. A year after the confrontation, my parents had settled comfortably into their apartment. Dad had taken a part-time job at a local hardware store, which he actually seemed to enjoy. Mom had made friends in their complex and joined several activity groups. Jason had experienced several business failures and was back to conventional employment, though he continued to support our parents financially, as agreed. Our relationship remained strained but civil. As for me, I had reclaimed my home and my peace of mind. The office was once again my workspace, the guest room ready for actual guests, who respected boundaries and the living room arranged to my preference. More importantly, I had learned that family love didn't mean sacrificing my own well-being or boundaries. True family respect meant honoring each person's autonomy and needs, not just taking what you wanted because of shared DNA. To anyone watching who might be facing similar family boundary issues, remember that you can love someone deeply while still setting firm limits on their behavior. Your home is your sanctuary, and you have every right to protect it. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a relationship is to establish clear boundaries, even when it feels impossibly difficult in the moment. If my story resonated with you, please share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you handle it? Hit the like button if you think I made the right decision, and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey.